Hey, thanks for tuning into my channel today. I'm Paul Laverne of Turning Point Counseling. I'm a registered psychotherapist, a teacher, and a trainer. And I also interview people on this channel talking about aspects of sexuality from many different perspectives. I speak to academics, I speak to authors, I speak to former porn performers, I speak to activists, and I'm here today with Heidi Doheny Jay, who is an author, blogger, and published columnist who explores the mysteries of life, relationships, and what makes men and women tick. Heidi has a penchant for interviewing and questioning everyone about their choices in love, life, and what truly makes them happy. She's worked with many clients, helping them better understand themselves and ultimately their relationships so they may find true, sustaining happiness. To learn more about Heidi, you can visit her at www.heiditheauthor.com or at Heidi the Author on social media. Heidi is the author of Confessions of 400 Men, where men divulge all about the women they love, the women they've left, and the ones that got away. And that's what our focus is going to be on today. Hello, Heidi. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, Paul. Thank you for having me.
It's great to meet. I'm in Canada, and for those that are maybe listening to this, Heidi is about 2 miles from Canada, actually, upstate New York, very close to Kingston. And unfortunately, she hasn't been here since COVID, which is understandable. Hopefully you can enjoy some of our great weather and beautiful countryside before the summer is over.
Yes.
So really great to make your acquaintance. Let's get right into this, Heidi. My first question is, let's tell the viewers about what led you to write a book about men's innermost thoughts and desires and motivations regarding love and sex. Tell us a bit about your journey to take that project on.
Sure. So I grew up with 2 parents who were very happily married. And I also grew up thinking very highly of my father, had a great relationship. And my brother was actually my best friend growing up. So I grew up with a really strong image of men. I felt that men were were great, right? I was fortunate to have that experience. And so my sister gets married, then I get married, and then my brother gets married, and everybody's happily married, and I get divorced. So at this point, if you've been through a divorce, you kind of do a lot of self-reflection. And I thought over the years of that, after the divorce, maybe I was missing something. How is it that everybody in my family, is happily married, but I was not happily married? And how, what am I missing? I could understand it if I grew up without having any influence of any, strong male role models, but I did. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm missing something. And, the thing that I think women do a lot of the times is we ask other women about men. And I started on this path as I started thinking about all this stuff. And I thought, well, why doesn't anybody ask men about men? And so I started looking like, are there a ton of books about men? And they're all about women, most of them, and they're not so much from the man's point of view, or they're about women to help men to understand what, so there wasn't much about how men actually feel and view relationships.
So specifically about men and their emotional, their inner world emotionally, and what they actually think about relationships and about.
Yes.
Is that what you mean?
Yes. And so that actually started it. And it was supposed to be, this small, I was going to do a small ebook. I had about 15 questions, so I started with about 15 of my own questions, and I started to do a couple interviews, and I was going to do about maybe 20, 25, and then just do a small ebook. And along the way, somebody said, why don't you ask other women too? Get some more questions. You're only one woman. And so I took that idea, and then I asked about 75 other women, random women, people I knew, people in line at the grocery store. It didn't matter, different ages. And so I asked them, what do you want to know or understand about men?
So did
So
you just approach random women in the
yeah,
grocery store?
yeah.
Hey, I'm writing a book, and what?
Yeah, hey, is there anything, if somebody asked you, what would you love to know about men? What would your one question be? I
Oh,
got
yeah.
like, how come they don't empty the dishwasher all the way to, how do they decide who they're going to marry, or how do they decide to
Mm,
leave a relationship?
mm.
So there was a wide range, but over time there would be patterns and similar questions. So I got it down to about, I think it was 51 questions. And so I had a couple of my own, which started, the whole process, because for me, I was having failed relationships. So for me, I wanted to know what makes a man commit, what makes him want to stay, what makes them choose one woman over another. And so I took my questions, the other women's questions, ended up with about 51, and then started interviewing. And still at that point, I was only going to do, the 20 or 30. But as I started interviewing men, every time I'd interview a guy, he would say, well, you have to interview my best friend or my brother or my cousin or my dad or my nephew, and it just, I mean, it just took off. I still get, emails and, can I be interviewed? And I'm like, no, the book is done,
Yeah.
but
Well, I find that so interesting, because isn't the kind of the stereotype that men just really actually don't want to talk about their feelings,
ah,
or
yes,
they actually don't even have feelings.
right. And
So they don't
but
have feelings, and if they do, and it's probably likely they don't, but if
right.
they do, they're certainly not wanting to talk about them. And yet in the book you were kind of off to a little bit of a rocky start until you kind of figured out, just a sort of way to approach people.
Yeah.
And then you were literally inundated
Yeah.
by men that never met you.
Right. And
Yeah, and you're asking 51 questions of a very intimate and personal
yeah,
nature, correct?
yeah, yeah, yes.
And I don't remember reading, because I've read your book. I read the book, and I don't remember really reading an account of a guy. Like, there was one story of a guy that gave like short one-word answers, but basically the other guys were more or less an open book. Like, what do you make of
Yes. And surprisingly, so it was maybe 420 total, and there were about 10 to 12 that I just could not use. I
it? Okay,
knew once you start to do this, you can kind of tell who's just
5
telling
minutes,
the
right?
story. Yeah, pretty early on. And it was a little frustrating because it's a 2 to 3 hour interview. So, in the first 10 minutes, if someone's not really being genuine, it's a little frustrating because it's going to be quite a bit of
A
time.
long
But
2 hours, yeah.
yeah, so I knew, that they were just not being genuine, but the majority of them, I had to end the interview because they would
Hmm.
keep talking. And I think it's a lot of it has to do with, from what they told me and what I learned, not always, but overall, sometimes the last person a man's going to talk to is the most important woman in his life. That sometimes is the least
Mm.
person that he's going to talk to. And so to have an unbiased, non-judgmental, I don't matter to these men. They're never going to see me again. They don't, I
Well,
always come back to the plane example. You're on the plane and you connect with somebody and you share a secret you've never told anybody because
yeah.
you're never going to see me again. And they knew they would be anonymous, and they knew they would never see me again. So I think there's a safety in that, where there's a comfort where you can, they're not going to judge you. I mean, I think much of it comes from, and I know that, and talking to the men, that being judged by the woman they love, or it coming back, hearing about it 3 months later, that, well, you said this, and then
Mm,
after time, I think from a man's perspective, they'll say, well, then I'm not going to share anymore because
mm,
this ends up it comes back to haunt me later,
mm.
or she judges me or thinks less of me, or so it's,
Yeah.
I did find, and it was, I had to practice just listening,
Mm.
and not judging them, not really making too much of a reaction one way or the other, because my goal was to really get as much as much unbiased information as you can get, in
Did you
having.
find that hard? Did you find that just listening is harder than it appears to be? Or you
I
maybe naturally, or maybe you're a good listener naturally, but
I
so I
think I'm
find it harder than it
I
looks.
think I'm a pretty good listener, and I
Mm,
think because I didn't know them, it was easier for me to not feel compelled to share my, over
mm,
time, a lot of them would start to say, well, why do women do this? Or what do you think about that? And
mm.
at first I resisted answering, but over time I started to just share a little bit, because they really want to know, they were really genuinely interested in knowing. So
Yeah. Yeah, you made a very interesting statement. Actually, before I go to that one, just a reflection. What you said. It sounds like if you're, would you say that if your first marriage had not ended and you were, let's say, still happily married, that you may have never undertaken this project? Because it sounds like it had a very strong personal
yeah,
element to you.
I,
Interesting.
I, I do think that was the impetus that
Hmm.
led me to, the project for sure,
Hmm. Hmm.
and to write the book.
Yeah, yeah. You made an observation. Men are not as they appear. Trust me. How do men appear, and why this incongruity between? Uh, well, I think I know part of the answer, but and maybe being a man, I have a perspective on that. But what is it about men are not as they appear? How are they really?
I think that they appear tough and they appear strong, and they also appear, which this was a big surprise for me. They appear as though they don't really, their feelings don't get hurt. And
Mm,
that was one of the biggest things that I learned, is that we as women, we hurt men's feelings every day, all day long. I mean, and
wow.
most I spoke to, they're like, oh, we don't know men that we don't hurt their feelings,
Mm,
maybe once a year, twice a year. And most of the men would laugh and say, like once or twice a day, sometimes an hour. So that was a
wow.
big surprise for me. So I think they
Yeah.
appear, they're taught, on the playground to appear strong, not cry. So I think over time that's perceived by women in general as they don't really have too many feelings. So how do you hurt someone's feelings if you don't think they have a whole lot of feelings? And so in learning that, particularly how much we hurt their feelings, they're kind of the opposite of how they appear. Almost,
Mm,
I think they're in some ways more sensitive than women, and I think that a lot of men said they can't live without a partner. I mean, when you look at the amount of men and women when they get divorced, the men tend to remarry or find
yeah.
another mate really quickly. You don't usually see a guy single for 5-10 years, or where women
Yeah.
are, they can
Could go a decade with being
they could
single.
go a decade, yeah. And that, and that we can talk about that more, but I have some thoughts on that too, as to why that is. But so I think they just appear stronger than they are. I think they're underneath it, they're not, they're sensitive, they have feelings, and
Mm,
they don't want anybody to know that, though. you
yeah.
know
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe just to give an immense, you probably heard what I'm gonna say, but give an immense perspective is like you are very much socialized, and I want to talk about Dr. Garfield's summary. Like I was reading that, and I'm just like, check, check,
I
check.
know.
Like, it was brilliant, right?
Yeah,
But
he's
we're
good.
socialized and taught to not show weakness or pain,
Yeah,
right? And if you're playing roughhousing in the playground, or you get hurt, you're gonna do everything you like.
mhm,
I don't mean when you're 3 or 4, like you're just gonna cry.
sure,
It
yeah,
happens somewhere around age 5, I think, or 6.
mhm,
You're gonna do everything you can to not cry.
yeah,
So something happens between when you're hurt, cry, and when you're hurt, do everything you can not to cry. And then
yeah,
that just generalizes into all forms of pain, including emotional pain. I think
yeah,
I think we learned as boys to block physical pain because that shows you weak. And
right,
we're constantly, without realizing it, finding our place in the hierarchy, the pecking order, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then that just generalizes into emotional pain as well. Does that
Right.
kind of line up with what you guys are
Absolutely.
talking
Yeah, absolutely. And I think,
about?
like you said, they just take that on into adulthood, and that's all. That's, you men grow up. That's being a man. I mean,
Mhm,
that's the definition of being a man.
mhm,
Kind of like Dr. Garfield. Just the strong. I mean, it's how men are supposed to be, especially in our society. Um,
mhm.
I think
Yeah,
it's, and probably throughout the world too, because it tends to be universal. But I think it's particularly, in this area of the world, it's
yeah.
really important.
Well, I had a few other questions. Let's just jump to Dr. Garfield's summary, because I feel it's just a good time to segue into that. So he wrote a book. Dr. Garfield wrote. Did he write a book?
He
The
did
called
breaking
the code, or
breaking the male code. Yes,
breaking the male code? Okay. So Dr. Garfield studied men for this book, and he came up with the code that governs men's behavior. This is the code: emotional restraint, withholding personal information, defending our position, controlling our and others' behaviors, sustaining ourselves without assistance. So I take that as being overly independent rather
Mhm.
than interdependent, like in
Right.
a healthy relationship. Okay, so the next one is acting independently, competing, commanding attention, and being physically tough. And then you write, um, if women really thought about this, like really tried to understand that, or sorry, this may be my thoughts, sorry, I don't know. Anyway, you either wrote this or I wrote this. So we'll sort it out in a minute. But if women really tried to understand that, it would give them insight into the male psyche. How many women do you think? So this is a rhetorical question. If you're a woman, I want you to think about this. Do you even know there's a universal code that governs the thoughts and actions of every man you? Do you even know that?
I
Right?
think, yeah,
Mm,
I I think most women don't actually fully comprehend the depth
mm,
that it goes to, and how
mm,
men are raised, like we talked about, and that's that. And the interesting thing is that other men will hold men to that code, you
yes.
know and that, I think, is a fascinating thing too, that a lot of men will say, well, other guy, I have to, I've got to be tough in front of other men. So now you have to be tough for women, but you have to be tough in front of other men too. And that's also why men don't talk to, in general, most men do not talk to their other male friends when they're lonely, depressed, hurt over a breakup. Most men, with the exception of maybe like the much younger generation, I think they're a little bit more in tune with their feelings. But overall, that's why men don't talk to other men. So
Yeah.
it's it's this it's this incredible pressure. And I don't know that women really think about that and fully understand it, because I think for
Mm,
most women that I've known throughout my life, and you hear other women talk, that your acquaintances or their friends of friends, and I think for most women, they just think, men don't really have a whole lot of feelings. They're, a lot of times they think they're just jerks. They've had bad experiences, and that
mhm.
there's not much depth to them at all.
Yeah.
And they're just, I don't know. I would say that most women don't fully grasp, you know, how much that comes into play for men to shape their personalities.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, sometimes be working with a couple, and I'll maybe explain. And I'm not saying the men understand women's, world
sure, sure,
by
yeah,
our stretch, okay? But
right.
I tend to agree, Heidi, that there's a real disconnect there between, like, let's say I've worked in white collar jobs in
Mhm.
for corporations and offices, and I've worked blue collar jobs, right? And I think a lot of women, let's say your husband works on a job site in a construction crew, I
Mhm.
don't think they really get what it's like. Like when they walk on the job site, God, this is how guys talk to each other.
Yeah.
Joe, you're fucking late. What the fuck? Get
Yeah.
over there. We're waiting for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay, okay. And then it's the guy there's constant
Mhm.
risk of being
Yeah.
hurt, cut. I mean, when I worked in construction, I constantly was covered with scratches, cuts,
Yeah.
bruises, aches, and pains. And you know what? You don't complain,
No. No.
right? A sack of rocks falls on the guy. You okay? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Meanwhile,
No,
he's
I'm fine.
cracked 3
Oh,
ribs or something, right?
yeah.
And then they
Yeah.
go, hey, give me that fucking power tool, asshole.
Yeah.
And
Right. Right.
this is his
Yeah.
world. And
Yeah.
then he has to come home and be sensitive, thoughtful, kind, patient, and I'm not saying he shouldn't be those things.
Right.
It's just they have no idea how,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that was kind of the theme of the whole book was there's so much for women, right? Like if we need help with something, there's support groups, there's
Mm,
community, there's online. I mean, there's so much help for women. But for men, it's kind of this like, the suffering in silence thing. And
yeah.
I just felt like I wanted to give them just a place for their voice, whether you know,
Mm,
it might not be the answers to everything, and it may not it completely explain to a woman, what men are really like, but at least it gave men the opportunity to share. And I think that's also why so many men were just relieved to have somebody ask them
mm.
about how they felt, you know.
Well, there's I picked
No one
up a
does.
saying. Yeah, I think it was one of my mentors said this, and it stuck with me. People don't value what they don't understand, like just in general.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So what I see is being so helpful about your book, Heidi, is that if it helps women understand, they can now value the things that men value
Right.
because they understand that men actually have feelings, but they don't feel safe to share because they'll be judged.
Yes.
Like that to me, that's like one of the biggest takeaways from the whole
Mhm.
book.
Yeah.
But if women don't understand that, then it's not on the radar. So you can't blame them in a way for not
I know,
respecting
but
that.
but it's interesting. I will say I wrote this book for women, but more
Mm.
men like the book. So
More
it
really? How based on what? Like feedback or
feedback.
polls or social
Um,
media comments or
I would say feedback mainly. I think for a lot of women, they assumed if a woman's writing a book about a man, they wanted to kind of jump on the man hating,
Mhm.
bandwagon. There's many people who say to me, oh, it's a man hater book without knowing anything. Just the
Yeah,
assumption is that I'm a woman, so I would write a book about how bad men are. So
right.
there are a lot of women who really, really loved it.
Did
But
you
I
have
would say,
any hate from women though?
I had a little bit of passive aggressiveness, like what, why are you being so nice to men? Like men are assholes, Why would you, why did you have to go and like write a book about how great men are or how they really are and that they're really
Yeah,
kind
or
and
just that they're not all assholes.
exactly that they're
Just
not all
that,
that.
like,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
when I hear that, I hear a woman who's in pain from probably terrible personal experiences, and
yeah.
I have run into women who have almost every man they've been in a relationship with has universally treated them like shit. So I do hear that.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
in fairness to that criticism, I'm fortunate.
Mm,
I've struggled in relationships, but not experiencing men being assholes.
mm, mhm.
I mean, I've had, of course, I've had my share of men who weren't as considerate and kind, but so I think I just men tend to the when I hear from men, they'll say, "Thank you so much for writing this book because now I know I'm not alone. Like I didn't
Mm,
know that my other male friends feel the way that I feel." And
mm,
so I think it's that for a lot of men who don't talk to other men, they found comfort in hearing that okay, a lot of other guys are just like me. So I'm not the only one, so it's,
Yeah, I imagine it's be validating for a lot of
yeah,
men to read that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Let's just switch gears for a sec. Heidi, you really wanted a line from your book I wanted to come back to. This
sure.
is a quote from a guy, and I think many men said this to you. Women spend too much time looking to men for their happiness.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about that, and I'm curious because it's not like girls are actually told when they're little, okay, sweetie, remember that when you grow up, you have to find your happiness in a man.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe in the 50s they did, I don't know, but no one said that in 60 years.
Right.
So go find a man that will make you happy and everything will be okay. Says no one, and yet where does this come from? And I'm curious hearing, you as a woman, what your insight is on that.
Yeah, I mean, as much as it's not said verbatim anymore, it's pervasive in like Disney, right? Look at, she's
Mhm.
hopeless, and then
Yeah,
until the
Prince
man
Charming and Cinderella kind of thing.
comes along, the children's books are still, I mean, they're shifting, but they're still, I'm not okay until he comes along.
Mm.
Where is it ever that the man's not okay until he finds a wife? Nowhere, I don't think. I mean, maybe,
Well,
but
maybe the odd romantic comedy or something, I don't
yeah,
know,
yeah. I
but
mean,
I hear what you're saying, yeah.
I think it's just subtly, in so many things that women aren't okay or enough, until they find a man. And I know so many women who they're waiting to be happy until they find the man, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, I, most of us, most women in general, and yes, of course, while it's great, everybody's always happier when you're in a happy relationship, of course, but but for some reason there's this, women, have to find a man to be happy, and so they look to, I think, to men for their happiness. And I don't know, I mean, we could talk about this in many different layers, but I do think that adds to the pressure for men to feel like they now need to make the woman happy. So it's, I think it's just something that we grow up with seeing,
Mm.
you know, that, you know,
It's implied rather than explicitly told.
yeah. Or, when are you going to have grandkids, or,
It's
you
sort
know,
of like I can't be if I'm a woman, I can't be fulfilled till I have children, kind of thing.
right, right.
Similar?
Yeah.
Is it similar
Yeah.
to that maybe?
Yeah. I think
Mm.
it's a similar thing. I there's probably other areas as well, but I feel like as a woman, that's what we kind of feel at maybe a subconscious level, that until we find someone, there's something wrong with you until you find,
Did
you know.
you escape that, Heidi, yourself, or did you find that? Well, if you don't mind me asking, I mean, because like you say, it's the culture, like we're swimming in the water.
Yes.
So we don't even necessarily, like you and I are talking as older people that are in hindsight.
Right.
But when you reflect on your life growing up swimming in the water of that,
Right.
did you kind of mostly escape that trap, or did you find that crept in, or?
I think, I don't think I fully escaped it, because when I look back on my marriage, he's a wonderful man. He's a great person. But I think I felt that pressure, societal, or, that you get married, when you're close to 30, or, you approach that time when you're done with like college things, but yet you're
Mm,
not ready to stay home every night at 8 o'clock, and, you're not there yet. You're in that time when it's like, you're expected to get married and have children.
mhm,
And, and I think you know, fell under that pressure to some degree, because when
mm,
I look back on it now, I think, had we dated longer, we probably wouldn't have gotten married. We would have
mm.
ended up just breaking up. So,
Yeah.
but
Well, and I'll just add this too, if you're listening, and I'll say this to men or women, if you're a man thinks that I'll be happy when I find a good woman, or a woman thinking I'll be happy when I find a good man, this is a very dangerous way to think, because here's what's going to happen. You're going to find a man or a woman, and then you're going to get in a relationship, and then your eyes will be open to their flaws and foibles and character defects and their you know yeah, the ways that they fall short. So
Right.
now you're just going to transfer your happiness to when they change, I'll be
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you'll basically never be happy, because your happiness is, you've given that, I hate, so it sounds like such an Oprah type
No, I
cliche, but
totally
giving
agree.
your power
You are though.
away. You've given
You
your
really are.
power away. But I have to say it because it's kind of true. It's true, right?
It's very true. It's similar
Yeah.
to if I'm miserable, but I keep moving to a different state and different job and different man or woman. I'm taking myself everywhere, right? I'm still
Everywhere you go, there you are, right?
far, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's true. It's hard. It's a, it's a learning process, and I think we all struggle with it to some degree. It's all relative, but you to find that a happiness on your own is, I don't know if that's something that you're really, it's on your radar when you're 28, 29. I
Mm.
think you're intellectually aware of it maybe, but you haven't really fully embraced it, I guess, yet. I don't know. I mean, I have some younger friends too who are just, and I did it myself. I mean, their lives are on hold until he comes along, and they're
Mhm.
just waiting,
Mhm.
until the right Mr. Right
It's
comes.
sort of sad. I mean, it's understandable, but kind of sad at the
Yeah,
same time,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Mhm.
So, I don't know. It's one of the plights of women, I guess you could, is, so I don't know, but I think you just have to. I don't have all the answers, of course, but I think that we all have our things, as men and as women, but the percentage of what's out there and explaining and sharing for women's side of it is like 85-90%, and on the male side it's about 8-10%. So that was also why I thought I just want to get their viewpoints and feelings out, because they don't really have an outlet. If you don't talk to your partner and you don't talk to your male friends, who are you talking to,
Well,
and
I run into so many men that they don't have a single male friend.
yeah, right, because then that's
Like
why
they
I
have buddies, they have
yeah,
buddies they play hockey with or
yeah,
watch the game with or golf, but
yeah,
like to really sit and say, talk about a personal problem or an emotional
yeah,
issue,
yeah.
they wouldn't even know where to begin. And that's very
And that
sad
is,
to me.
it is, but I do think that sometimes can explain a little bit as to why men have affairs, because if they find a
Mm,
friend, a female friend, right, and they may,
mhm.
all right, some men say they're always attracted to every woman but let's just say they're not really attracted quite yet, but they become friends with her.
Yeah.
Now over time, they start to share intimate things because because they feel comfortable.
Mhm.
And then maybe that turns into feelings that they didn't, that are confusing for them, and that, so I think that explains why some men have female friends, because at least they can talk to them, you
Mhm.
know I mean, I have male friends that talk to me about things that are you know pretty personal. So it makes me feel for men, because as a woman, there's so many people I can talk to, right? I mean, not, but
Mhm.
there's family, there's friends, there's, if I wanted to go online, I'm sure there's, you know, chat groups about some, whatever I'm upset about, you
Yeah.
know, support groups, there's community. I can go to, the gym or a yoga studio and meet people, and women in general, I think, are better equipped at creating a community.
Mhm.
If they're single or they're going through something, where I think
Mhm.
men kind of just retreat, shut down, get quiet, and try to figure it out on their own. You know.
So there's a part, this is the part I was thinking of earlier that you wrote in the book. You say to women, imagine the stress and emotions that come from your families, your personal and work life, and never talking about it. Okay. In fact,
Right.
you have no one to talk to, no friends to call, no sharing on social media, no one to commiserate with. You're constantly afraid of being ridiculed or judged for even having feelings.
Mhm.
And now imagine that. And that's what it's like being a man.
Yeah. Your average woman wouldn't make it one day like that.
Right.
I'm not a woman hater either. People are great, but I'm just saying, your average woman would really struggle with that. There are the outliers. There's always outliers, but there's no sweeping statements. Nothing's ever 100%, but the majority of women would have a hard time.
Yeah.
With that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what the ratio is of women to men in my profession? Therapists, counselors. Want to guess?
I don't know. I bet it's
80-20, 80% women.
I was gonna say 60.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Like when I show up at a meeting or a Zoom call, it'll be me and 10 or 12 women a lot of times.
wow.
I'll be the only guy. So even for guys to find a man to talk to, but some men do like going to a female therapist because they do want to talk to a woman, and that is a safe place where they won't be judged.
Sure.
But they also like going to a man sometimes too, because they want to talk man to man. Right. It's just that the vast majority of men don't seek out therapy in general.
And that's what I was gonna just
because of the
ask.
code, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
So they don't.
Everything in this code precludes you going to therapy, basically.
Yeah.
You live by this code.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But again, it's perpetuated by men.
Yeah, we're part of we're the problem.
Yeah.
We're the solution and the problem.
And that's what several men said to me, specifically that we're a big part of this problem as to why men are the way they are. But you're right, they're part of the solution too. And I think it's changing a little. Male groups are becoming a little more of a thing. So that's happening a little bit more, but it's nowhere near what is available, for women. So, but you're right. You have to get through that whole barrier of, well, men don't even do that in the first place. So why is there a male, group to get together? So it's a tough thing to break through for sure.
I was helping my ex-wife's cousin build his house a few years ago, and I made a list of I made a video of the whole thing to give to him as a keepsake. And so I came up with a list of top 10 things you never hear on the job site. So they were like, do you guys moisturize every night? Who watched Oprah yesterday?
Yeah.
Does this tool belt make me look fat? And a bunch of others.
Oh my God, that's great.
They love them. They howled because it's all those cliches like that we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
And or one of them was, hey boss, you really hurt my feelings when you snapped at me like that. And the guys howl, and we know it's true. Like we know all this about ourselves.
Right. But no one's ever going to admit it, and no one's ever going to.
But that's why we use comedy as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Men use humor a lot to deal with those emotions, right? So if someone's angry, a guy doesn't say, hey, you really hurt me when you snapped. They go, well, fuck you too.
Right.
That's what we do. And then you go, fuck you. And then you go have a beer and laugh about it later.
Yeah.
So it may be primitive, but it's effective.
But that's what we see, right? And we think, oh, they were just screaming and punching each other, and now they're fine too. I mean, that's always the thing. Like, it takes women 6 years to get over a fight with another woman. It takes men 6 minutes. Right. So we see that and think, oh, well, they're fine. He didn't that was awful what they said to each other, but they obviously didn't hurt each other's feelings because now they're sitting at the bar together. We would never do, never. I mean, we wouldn't think to do that. So, because we would have to ruminate and go over it and talk about it with 6 other women and, you know, and then question the front. I mean, it just goes on and on. So I think, you know, we see that and we think, well, you know, that shows us, oh, they're tough. Their feelings aren't hurt. But you're right. They do use comedy for sure, you know, to soften a lot of that. And it makes me think of how so many men shared that, you know, the way that they show women that they care is by doing things for them. And also sex, you know, sex and doing things is how men want to connect and show a woman that they care. And a lot of women, including myself, I mean, I clearly own up to that in the book, want to hear, you know, that you care. Where for a man, it's easier to show a woman in general, I think, that, you know, that he cares. And then to connect with a woman, men typically want to have sex because that's much more than sex for them. It's a connection. It's an intimate, emotional. It's one way for them to I think, feel emotional and express their emotion in a manly way, you know? So
yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more too, because I thought that was a really important, interesting point. You basically in the book realize in talking to men, or maybe you knew this already, I don't know, but that the emotional connection men make with sex is more prevalent and powerful than most people imagine, or most women imagine. And
yeah, I did not realize that.
What's that?
I did not realize that.
Yeah. So
You know.
to them, it made me think of a client I had, a woman, and he had some issues as well, but he was working on them. But I met her by herself, and she was talking about, you know, he's always bugging me for sex, right? And says always. I think she means maybe 3 or 4 times a week. I'm not sure.
Right.
So I said, do you have any idea? I mean, I said it nicely, but basically I said, do you have any idea what sex means to him? She had no clue.
Right.
Beyond that, it feels good.
Yeah.
That's it. Oh, he wants sex because it feels good. That was it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, the reason men actually want sex is that it's their main way of feeling connected, nurtured, comforted, validated, accepted.
Yes.
So I think I covered, because you had a list of a few other things, closeness and intimacy. There you go. But at the same time, he's afraid of acknowledging this. So he will never say to you, hey babe, I'm really, you know, missing our closeness and intimacy because, you know, I feel the need to really connect with you. And one of the ways that I do that is sex. Says no man ever. But they all think that. But
that would go so far with so many women.
Right.
They would probably right away be like, I'll take my clothes off right now. You know, like, but it's an interesting thing how in so many ways, the things that we really want to say are the things that would eliminate 90% of, you know, the stress or issues around it. If we would say, the disconnect, thank you. Just to say what, you know, we really feel. And so, but yes, you're right. Men don't say that, but women would love to hear that. I do think that would be helpful to women.
And do you think women generally know what we just said, what we just talked about, what sex means to a man? And if you could give a percentage on that, do you think 10% of women know, 50%? Just as a guess, I'm not going to quote you, don't worry, but
I would guess like 10 to 20%. There are women out there who really understand men really well. And I think they're really great wives. But I would say the majority of women would not understand how deeply emotional sex is for men. Because again, you're growing up, you're going through college, men just want to sleep with every woman that they can sleep with. So to us, not very important.
That's
you're doing it with everybody. Yeah, right. So if we think you're having sex with everybody and you can't remember her name even, then it's really not, that's not precious to you, right? Like that's
Mm.
so it's such a it's an interesting thing how, what's portrayed is oftentimes not even close to what's real. But
Yeah, I don't want to get too far into this, but as we're talking, I'm thinking that I work with a lot of compulsive sexual behaviors.
Mhm.
We were chatting before we got started here. So I'll often talk to men that have been exposed to hardcore graphic online pornography. Like, I'm not talking Playboy,
Right.
online porn. Okay,
Yep.
hardcore, age 9 or 10, and they've never gone 2 weeks without masturbating to pornography
Yep.
in their whole adult life. So what that has done to their brain is it has wired them to pursue object sex. And
Mhm.
they are, in fact, totally emotionally disconnected from sex. So it's like porn, long-term, consistent, compulsive exposure to sexual material is actually creating the kind of guy that women think men are, but aren't,
But
but they
aren't.
are
Right.
becoming that.
Yeah. Which
So I
is
just thought I'd
really
throw that in
fascinating.
there because this
Yeah.
scares me, right? Because when you're seeing men in their 20s that can't actually even get an erection anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And to them, their girlfriend or partner is the, like, literally one of 4 to 5 thousand naked women they've seen.
Yeah. Which
And
is, why do you think it's just part of accessibility to online, or I mean, why has porn become so prevalent in, especially for younger men? I mean, I guess it's obviously generations are different with it, but
mhm. Well, there's lots of reasons. So there's like the 4 A's: anonymous,
yeah,
affordable, is a free, basically,
yeah,
accessible,
mm,
and especially since the last 10 years with smartphones, and aggressive. Because porn companies, and again, we could talk a whole hour about this, but what people don't realize is there are very sophisticated multi-billion-dollar corporations behind these
yes,
companies, and they have co-opted all social media platforms as funnels, sales funnels, to
right,
draw in their clients, right? Because this is everywhere. Like, I think a third of all of Twitter accounts are
yes,
just
yeah,
backlinks to porn
yeah,
sites.
yeah,
Like, just, if you don't believe me, just go on Twitter and
yeah,
you will
yeah,
go down that rabbit hole so fast.
yeah,
It will make your head spin,
yeah,
right? And then it's just the fact that it's what therapists call supernormal stimulus. So it's sort of like a cocktail of the perfect drug that will draw you in and be as alluring. It's probably the most alluring and rewarding source of reward, stimulation and reward that the human brain can probably get. Right?
interesting.
Yeah. And then it changes you. Like, it's like a drug, and it actually rewires your brain and the neural pathways. So you actually get addicted. It's a process addiction like gambling, but you
Sure,
get addicted
yeah,
to your own dopamine.
mm,
And
it's,
there's lots of other stuff too, and a lot of trauma plays into that. And
yeah,
mm, there's a lot of levels to that. But yeah, no,
fascinating.
like you were thinking about, like, just as we were talking about how sex is so important to men emotionally, and yet this is, as we speak, this
Right,
is changing.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm still trying to figure out what that means. Anyway, I
yeah, I know that could be that's a
we
whole
could
nother.
really, maybe that's another conversation. But
Yeah,
since we're on the topic, though, like, you did ask men if they watch porn, and you said most men admitted to using it. Did,
yes,
did it ever go beyond that, or was that kind of like the one question and then on to the next one, or did
yeah.
anything open up about that or
There were
elaborate?
some that would talk about how they had started to go down the road of watching it, and they felt that it was getting dangerous. And so they stopped doing it. But I would say that was more men on the older, maybe 35, 40 and older side, who are aware that it's a dangerous thing to do. But then there was quite a few younger, 18, 19, 20, 21 who don't watch it at all. So it
Oh,
was,
interesting.
which I was kind of surprised. Now, again, that could be
Were
that
they
they did,
Mormons?
that they didn't feel comfortable sharing it, but at the same time they shared, other things that were personal. So why would porn be any, different than anything else that was pretty personal? So, but I didn't really go beyond, why do you watch it? And I think it's more so because most of the men didn't really take it and kind of, run with it, so that it became something we would talk about for 10, 15, 20 minutes. So it was more so that they would say, yeah, sure, I do, or I have. Some of them would say they watch it with their girlfriends or their wives, and I would say, like, how did how's that received? And like, well, she loves it, or my last girlfriend
That's
hated it.
probably a lie. That's probably a lie. She either she may, but she's most likely pretending to.
Yeah.
Almost every woman I've ever talked to is like gone along with it to be cool at the beginning, and then they get
Right.
bored of it really quick.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, there are more and more females porn addicts.
Right.
Than ever. The fastest growing demographic of porn users is women 18 to 25.
Really?
Yeah, because they're marketing. When they're, when these sales committees get together in these porn companies, they're always about increasing market share. So they're going like, who are we not reaching?
Yeah.
Oh, women 18 to 25. Let's make some nice softer relationship type porn stuff that they'll like, because most women aren't into the slapping and choking, kicking and punching and name calling that's in mainstream porn right now, right?
Yeah.
I got a couple, so I'm just trying to keep track of time, Heidi. We got about 15 minutes here.
Okay.
But I wanted to for sure talk about two more things at least. A common theme that you heard men share was the pain they have in watching their sex lives as they stand by powerlessly, watching their sex lives slowly die, and then going from sexual passion to dying down until there's not even a spark, and how really painful that is for a lot of men. And I'll just say that I hear about this in my counseling practice working with couples. It's not unusual for me to meet couples that haven't had sex in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Yeah. And then I say, well, okay, so you haven't had sex in 3 years. So what's up? Like, you guys talk about that? Like, what's the plan here? And they don't talk about it. So they actually don't have any sex and actually don't talk about it.
Right.
What do you make of that?
Well, I heard over and over again that, again, I only talk to men, but so they would say, well, she's not interested in it anymore, at all. I can't get her. I'm tired of initiating. And that was the other thing. They would say, I just wish she would initiate, even, once a year would be nice, but I'm tired of always being the one that has to initiate. And to them, of course, on top of the emotional connection, for a man, if the wife or the girlfriend isn't interested in sex anymore, that's so personal to them. They take that as, I'm no longer desired. That's the words they would use.
Yes.
I'm no longer desired.
Yeah.
And if I'm not desired, what kind of man am I? I can't be much of a man if the very woman I love and have chose to spend my life with does not desire me anymore in that way. So,
does she even love me?
Right, exactly. But at the same time, they would always say, but I cannot live without her. Because I would say, well, why don't you leave? Why don't you, if this is, because there were quite a few men who the sex life was over, they weren't going to have an affair, so they just kind of suffered through it. And I would say, well, why don't you leave? And they would look at me like I was crazy for even that. Well, why? I can't leave. I can't live without her.
Oh,
Like,
interesting.
I can't function without this woman. I love her. She's the love of my life. There's no way I can live without her. I'm going to fall apart when she dies. Like, so I thought
Mm,
that I never, I don't know that I ever really got to the bottom of that, because
mm,
it still kind of doesn't, like, I get it, but it doesn't, I feel like it's not, I'm not done like investigating that idea, because
well, what do you think of this? Because the best I can figure out, and I've been doing this about 11 years, so it's not 20 years, but it's long enough that I've been around, and it's a trade-off. That's the best I can figure it, right? Because
right. Okay.
especially when you're talking, like, if you're talking to, like, okay, if you're talking 19-year-olds dating with no kids, that's a whole different scenario
Yes.
than someone in their mid-30s with 3 children, and they own a house and a rental property and a cottage, and they have investments together, and you say,
Yeah.
well, why don't you just leave? So the trade-off is maybe keeping up appearances. I keep all my circle of friends. My kids keep the family together, because that's hard on kids when you divorce, you know? So they weigh it out, and I wonder if women don't know this, right?
Right.
Like, I'm not interested in sex, but you're not gonna leave. Like, come on. Besides that, we have a pretty good life. And maybe they do, right? What do you
Yeah.
think? Is that just what it comes down to? A trade-off?
I guess so. I mean, I think, I don't know. That's a good question. Like, do they actually think, do the women think, well, he's not going to leave. We have, our kids, but like you said, we have everything together. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe the assumption is, well, he's going to go have an affair, and she doesn't really want to hear it. She doesn't want to know about it, but somewhere inside of her, she knows it's probably happening. I mean, if you haven't, I mean, there were guys I spoke to haven't had sex in 10 years, still
Did they have
married.
an affair?
Yeah, most of them did.
Most of them did, yeah. I see that too. I see that
Yeah.
too. I mean, I've had guys, I'm thinking of one guy who was, big tough guy, construction worker type guy, breaking down repeatedly in my office out of the sheer frustration of being sexually rejected for about 10 years, over
Yeah.
and over again, and to the point that he gave up.
Yeah.
And then he sort of had this desperate, sort of pathetic affair one night, half attempt at, I don't know,
Right.
and then got found out, and but he was just so desperately, and I'm not justifying this, okay? I think,
Sure.
I don't care how bad your marriage is, there's better options than cheating,
Right.
okay?
Right.
But this is what people do. So yeah, it's a thing. Well, and then let's circle back to the reasons men. So, to my summary of why men cheat based on
Mhm.
your interviews, I came up with three. So correct me if there's more: lack of sex, lack of affection, and feeling like they're not important or a priority. And again, I'm not making excuses for men's bad behavior here. Okay, I think
Right. Of
cheating is
course.
wrong, and
Yeah.
it's a really generally immature, low level kind of
Right.
option to choose.
Yeah.
But we're talking about why people do what they do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
does that kind of hit it? Lack of sex, lack of affection, and not feeling important, like feeling taken for granted.
Taken for granted was a big one that came through a lot. Like, she just doesn't appreciate anything I do or say, or little efforts that I make. And so over time they stop making them. And then of course that becomes the reason that she's angry, but the priority or feeling important is, a lot of them would say, well, when we met, we were dating, it was great. We got married, it was great. And then, we got a dog, and then we had kids, and now it's her, the
Mm.
kids, the dog, and then me.
Yeah, you're right. I
And
remember that in the book. He's
yeah,
like literally under the dog, right?
yeah, under the dog. And I have to be careful with that, because a lot of women, will say, well, who the hell's going to run this house? I've got to do everything. He can't, I'm sorry, your feelings don't matter anymore. I've got 3 kids, a dog, I have to keep things going.
Mhm.
So but I think that what they were trying to say was just thank me every once in a while. I think that's what a lot of men were saying. Just validate what I'm doing and thank me every once in a while, and just say you appreciate, or show me that you appreciate what I do. Yeah, the one guy, there was a guy from Australia who was renovating his entire house because his wife wanted it renovated. And yet he thought it was fine. And she never really said thank you. She never said, oh my gosh, you did a great job on this room. Everything looks great.
I have a client with the same story. And she would be dismissive and denigrating actually of all his hard work. Not just unappreciative, but like denigrating.
Right. Yeah.
You just crushed him.
Yeah. And that's what and again, he was another one who said, but he has affairs. It works for them. She won't have sex with him. He loves her, can't live without her. So it's just I think it's fascinating to, discover all these elements about men that aren't in the public. They're not out in the public. They're not talked about. They're barely understood by other men, because so many men just think they're the only ones feeling this way. And so it was something that I just wanted to give them, a platform to speak and hear their.
Well, it's a common reason for using porn as well. My wife won't give me sex, and
right.
What am I supposed to do? Right.
It's better than an affair if I just use porn.
And then these are rationalizations. I understand that. Sure. I mean, I'm just saying this is how they think. Yeah. I don't want to cheat, but if I masturbate to a porn scene, at least I'm getting some kind of sexual relief. I'm not hurting anybody, and they don't realize that they're setting themselves up for possibly developing a debilitating addiction. That's because no one goes into that thinking that way, right?
Right, of course, yeah.
I always, when a couple tells me, like, okay, we haven't had sex in 5 years, and my kind of response is, like, part of me is curious as well, like, what's her history, what's it like, let's say she has no interest, and there's many legitimate reasons, physical, hormonal,
sure,
abuse, there's things like that. So I'm well aware that there's things under the surface that may need to be addressed, but right now, today, you haven't had sex in 3 years. He's not supposed to have sex with anyone else. He's not even supposed to look at porn or even think about another woman sexually. And this is the plan for how long?
Forever. Right. Yeah.
20 years?
Yeah.
And you think this is a good plan.
Yeah.
And it boggles my mind, actually, that this is it. This is the plan, But it's a good conversation starter, and then you can kind of what's really going on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, Heidi, but in 2 minutes, if you had to tell women the most important things you learned from men writing this book, what would it be?
There's so many.
Yeah, well, you can take 3 minutes if you want.
Well, one would be, and it's just a little thing, but I think it would mean a lot. If you have to ask a man about how he's feeling, you have to stay silent for at least 60 seconds, and literally 60 seconds. I know it's only 1 minute, but not 2 seconds, not 4 seconds, and then answer for him.
Wow, right.
You have to count in your head, and to where you're almost like, okay, did he even hear me? Because he can't, like women, we think about how we feel all day long, right? So we can.
You do?
I mean, I think so. I think we think about more how we feel than I don't, well, that's another conversation, but I think we can express it. Maybe I'll put it that way. We can express it if asked, usually a little bit faster than men, because that's one of the things we get frustrated about is,
I admire that a lot about women, actually.
Yeah, they can't articulate it, and so women get frustrated, and so they answer for men, and then men say, well, ask her how I feel. After time, it's like, again, another thing that causes them, I think, to just share less and less over time. So I would say to just really be patient and quiet and listen.
Okay.
And I think, other than the obvious, that we hurt men's feelings way more than we realize. And that they're much more sensitive, than they even will share. And the validation. I mean, there's so many things. I would say to just appreciate them. There are so many. When I asked, one of the questions was, what's the nicest thing a woman can do for you? I think
I watched your video on that. You made a video.
Almost every single one of them said, just support me, just have my back.
Have my back.
Ways, right? I'm aware that goes both ways, but just support me and believe in me, and again, it's like that one gentleman who said, I'm Superman. If a woman believes in a man, there's nothing he can't do. And so right. I think to just remember those little things. They're not huge things on paper, but they're really meaningful, to men.
And any thoughts on the couple that hasn't had sex in 3 years, or she has no interest and they're not talking about it? Like, this is a situation.
That's a tough one because, there are so many factors, but I've been married and, I know what married sex is like, over time there's not as much.
Yeah, the novelty does wear off.
The novelty kind of wears off, and I don't know. We used to joke like married sex is like you're talking about your day and you're taking your clothes off. Like, oh, and how'd that go at the meeting? And then you jump into bed naked, and that's it. There's no, a lot of the guys said, when sending messages throughout the day or building up to. So for men, women want to be, wined and they want everything leading up to it, right? For the most part, men in general, again, I keep saying that, but women want all the the emotional side of it, that makes women want to be physical with a man. But again, that comes back to men tend to not show that. So to work for both of them, to work on that, for the man to realize that, instead of just going up and kind of grabbing her, like she wants to feel special. She wants to feel beautiful. She wants
at the stage, foreplay,
a little, exactly. Build it up. And for women, that's important, and so I think, but that's a tough one to answer, but I think that kind of thing it's a place to start to try.
Do you agree with this statement? When women feel loved, they give sex. When men get sex, they feel loved.
Yes.
You do, right? Okay.
I do.
Yeah, I find also that seems to be generally true. Right?
Yes, and that's a great way to say what just took me like 4 minutes to say.
Well, I did put you on the spot, but it's
perfect. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, I want to respect your time, Heidi. It's really, I love this conversation. And
yes.
It's such a cool, I'm just so, like, when I came across your book, I'm like, a woman did this? Like, she wrote a book doing makeup. I can't think of another book that I've ever seen. Like, maybe there's a couple out there. But it really drew me to that as a woman, you had the idea to do this. And so I want to thank you for that service that you've given to both men and women. I see this as something that equally serves both of them, as a way to open up an understanding. Like, we don't value what we don't understand, so why don't we try harder to understand?
Yes.
So that we can value our connections that we have to our partners, right? So yeah, I really enjoyed reading. It was really interesting. I'll put a link to the book in the notes.
Thank you.
And please, if you're watching it, go download it, read it. You can probably, it took me a few weeks because I was doing a little bit at a time, but you can probably get through the book, in a few days if you work at it.
Yeah.
And
it's not too, it's not too lengthy. So.
Yeah, and it's easy to read. Heidi's a great writer. It's easy to read. There's some really funny stories we didn't get into.
Oh, there's a couple
like right off the bat. I was literally laughing, reading this, and I'm just shaking my head. And I'm just, oh, Heidi, man, that must have been. I wish I could have been there and watched.
Yeah, it was
fly on the wall to see that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll sign off, Heidi, for now, and thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah,
I
okay.
could talk about this all day long, this topic, so.
Yeah, well, if you want to connect down the road and do a part 2 or something, let me know. I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay,
All right,
bye.
thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.